Hey, good morning, everyone. Hope it's a beautiful Tuesday morning wherever you are out there on your favorite river. My name's Adrian Oglesby. Want to thank Rusty and Kara and the rest of the River's Edge West crew for having me here at the conference with you all today. I do want to start off by saying that I am giving a different presentation than that which was advertised. The presentation that Paul and I were going to give this morning was essentially given in late January at the New Mexico Water Dialogue Conference. So if you want to learn more about that topic, feel free to visit the Water Dialogue's webpage where you can view that. But we thought we'd give you a little bit of variety and talk about changing conditions in the Middle Rio Grande Bosque. So there's my contact information. I work at the UNM School of Law at the Utton Transboundary Resources Center, where we primarily focus on water and natural resource issues in New Mexico and the Southwest. And to give you a sense of place about the Middle Rio Grande, first I should say that I will be referring to our riparian forest as the Bosque. That's how we do it here in New Mexico, so bear with us. The Middle Rio Grande is an incredibly complicated place to work. We've got a lot of irrigated acreage. We've got numerous Native American pueblos. We've got 3 national wildlife refuges. They have trees in them as well. I see my misspelling there. And a couple of cities. We've got a Supreme Court case brewing down south with Texas. We've got endangered species. And I'm going to talk about a lot of the traditional problems that you all are experiencing on your river systems as well. One thing I wanted to point out is that the current river, as we know it, has been around for about 5 million years in this valley. The Bosque itself, probably for about 2 million years. And then for those of you who weren't aware, the Middle Rio Grande is a rift valley, like the Nile. We're only concerned with what's happening up in that little bit of basin fill at the top right now. This valley has been farmed for a long time. It's actually the longest continually inhabited in the United States, particularly the floodplains. The Bosque is one of the largest contiguous cottonwood willow forests left in the American Southwest, possibly the largest. And this Bosque has been through a lot over the millennium. Well, one example is after the Spanish came in the late 1500s, there were some incredibly cold winters, and the Bosque, for the most part, throughout the Middle Rio Grande, was completely denuded for firewood. So again, this is a system that has experienced all sorts of changes, not the least of which was massive development in the upper watershed in the mid 1800s. First white settlers came into the San Luis Valley around 1851, bringing with them lots of sheep and a lot of desire for irrigated agriculture. So essentially, we saw a collapse of the upper watershed as the river was drained for farming, and a lot more topsoil was loaded into that river because of the grass denuding that was happening due to all those sheep up north. Down in the Middle Rio Grande, the valley flattens out considerably. So as that sediment came down in that weakened river system, it began to erode our river in some years, 10, 12 feet in some areas. That, of course, caused dramatic increases in flooding, river avulsion, and high groundwater. We had our own population growth happening at the same time down here in the Middle Rio Grande, and folks were moving in closer to the river and constraining it. And the floods that occurred, in particular, 1884 was just a massive flood, 100,000 cubic feet per second flood that raged for 9 days. Massive destruction of land and farmland, urban area. Had other big floods. 1904 was a particularly bad year. 1941 is one of our more notorious years in flood history. And the responses, of course, are things that you're all familiar with. The building of levees, the digging of drains, the raising of dams on our tributaries, the lining of the river with jetty jacks to constrain it, lock it in place, and the imposition of the main stem dam in the 70s, which I'll highlight here in a moment. Here's a shot from the West Mesa to give you an idea of how dynamic this river system was before we really tried seriously to harness it. I'd like to show you this shot. Not a terribly great aerial, but it is purported to be one of the very first aerial photographs taken in the American Southwest. So a little historic value there. Here's another shot of that same area. You can see the urban encroachment. This isn't much later, about 10 years later. But you can see still, braided channel, nice wide floodplain. This is Cochiti Dam. This is one of the largest earthen dams in the world. And it sits at the top of our valley now. Cochiti was put into operation in 1975, of course, to hold back those floodwaters that had been so destructive in previous years. Cochiti really is considered sort of the nail in the coffin of the natural hydrograph in the Middle Rio Grande. With this main stem dam, our snowmelt pulses were scalped, and the river became much more managed in relation to its natural functions. In addition to that kind of constraints, here are the jetty jacks. Thanks to Paul Tashjian for this photo. I see the credits a little below the screen there. Thousands of these jetty jacks were put into place up and down the river, locking the channel into place. And really, a major constraint for us. One of the interesting things about the jetty jacks being put into place is that one of the flood control acts in the mid-century mandated that the Middle Rio Grande be no more than 600 feet wide by law. So that's an interesting constraint as you're trying to think about a meandering river system. Here's some comparative aerials to give you a sense of the constraints in the channel. I will point out 1957 was a particularly dry year, but you can see how the sinuosity has really been reduced. This is another image of the constraints on the channel. Again, you can just see how narrow the channel has become over the years. Here's an image that helps you understand the urban encroachment. That's the red, and it is a lot. We have really hemmed this river in with our urban development, and I stand guilty of that. I like the fact that I live a couple blocks away from the river in the ancient flood zone. Here's an aerial from 1935 of the Albuquerque South Valley there on the left. You can compare it to the image from now on the right. Again, very narrow, constrained, a much narrower riparian corridor. But you can also see a denser riparian corridor as we now deal with exotics such as salt cedar and Russian olive. Here's just another image to help you understand the river channel narrowing and perhaps a bit of the story of a loss of our wetlands. This is right at the Central Avenue Bridge in the middle of Albuquerque, 1934, I believe. And here's what it looks like today. Again, a lot less water, a lot narrower channel. Essentially since the installation of Cochiti Dam, we've gone from the problem of having way too much sediment coming down the river to now not really having much at all. So we're experiencing sort of the inverse problem that I was first describing with instead of degradation of our channels, which is leading, of course, to increased disconnection from the floodplain. And then here is image showing you the wetland loss in the reach south of Albuquerque. That's 1935 to 89, give you a sense there. But I don't want to depress you too much. There is hope. We still do have floodplain connectivity. Here's a photo taken by John Fleck showing some of the flooding. I believe this was the 2017 overbank flooding that we experienced. And then we experienced more in 2019. We just had some really good water years and had some high flows. This is a shot from the 2019 overbank flood taken by Dr. Eichhorst over at the Bosque Ecosystem Monitoring Program. These intrepid citizen scientists are out looking for their precipitation gauge, which I think is funny given their situation. So lots of planning has been done in the Middle Rio Grande Bosque. We have learned a lot about this forest system over the last few decades. This publication came out in 1993. It was written by a committee of really great water managers, but led by Dr. Cliff Crawford, who we've lost now, but Dr. Crawford, it was a huge influence on many of us in this valley, and I sort of referred to as the Dean of the Bosque. This document I really consider to be the Bible of bosque management, and it was built largely on the concepts, not explicitly at the time, but on the concept of dynamic patch mosaic, and this opened up our eyes to how ecological processes happened in this valley, the dramatic importance of floodplain connectivity, and has been very influential on our water and land managers. Also in 1993, another big shift was that management of the 30,000 acres of bosque was largely moved from our irrigation conservancy district, the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, to the Rio Grande Valley State Park, which is operated by the city of Albuquerque and New Mexico State Parks. That opened the door for increased restoration opportunities and increased intensive management of the bosque. I wanted to highlight this planning document that was written in part by Yasmin Najmi. So shout out to Yasmin, our current River's Edge West New Mexico board member. This really hammered home the importance of the dynamic patch mosaic. Is a management concept for the bosque. This notion of mimicking natural and destructive forces, of the natural, destructive and creative forces that the river expresses, how we can mimic that, in our bosque management. And these planning documents, in addition to many, many more, led to the effort in 2015 to establish a conservation action plan for the entire bosque, for the full reach of it, not just one stretch, not just one neighborhood, but looking at this entire riparian forest as a whole, which really wasn't being done before. Different jurisdictions were doing their different projects. And so we wanted to look at the forest as an entire unit. The notion being that, for example, we were seeing a lot of cottonwood pole planting being done as a restoration technique, but not a lot of establishment of saltgrass meadows. It might be that using our analysis, some jurisdictions might decide that there are other types of habitat that they want to try to restore to complement the extensive cottonwood pole planting that's already going on. So here are conservation targets for those of you who are familiar with conservation action planning. These charts should either bring you great joy or angst. So we picked the riparian and wetland vegetation communities, native bird habitat, native fish habitat, wildlife corridors, and ditch and drain habitat as our conservation targets. Ditch and drain habitat really, is important in terms of the recreational uses by our urban constituents, the non-farmers who make up the urban part of the Middle Rio Grande, put a lot of stock in what they see along the ditches, so that is important. And then here we've listed the threats that we've identified down the left. And I just want to pause for a moment and thank the folks who were involved in the 2015 effort. It was a partnership with the Natural Heritage Program in Colorado, Lee Grunau and Renee Rondeau. We partnered with New Mexico Natural Heritage, Elizabeth Milford, and in particular, Esty Moldavan. And Yasmin has been a big part of this process from the beginning. The 2015 effort was initially funded with some seed money from the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. And so in 2020, we had to pause our effort for a few years there due to funding and everyone being busy. But in 2020, we were able to scrape together a few pennies and bring our team back together here in New Mexico, Yasmin and Esty in particular. We added Jonathan Tyrell, who recently graduated from New Mexico, someone who started in the Bosque Ecosystem Monitoring Program in 4th grade, so brought a tremendous amount to this process. And we held one big meeting and then pulled together subcommittees. We've got over 50 participants, scientists, decision makers, leaders in the community. So very grateful to all the folks who have participated in this, both in the 2015 effort and now in our ongoing sort of reinvigoration of this conservation action planning effort. So far, some highlights from our 2020 work here on the screen. We've pulled together our committees around these targets that we're trying to protect. Some incredible expertise. And our hope now is that we can turn to that last very important stage of taking what we've learned, taking all the recommendations that we've developed, and communicating these effectively to our decision makers so that we can see some real implementation on the ground of the dynamic patch mosaic from the top to the bottom of our valley. So with that, I'm going to end again with a photo from Esty Moldavan. One more thanks to Esty, who really has done the majority of the heavy lifting in this project over at New Mexico Natural Heritage. So with that, I'll thank all of you for your attention, and I will stand for questions. Thanks, everybody.